Right, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's meeting of Planning Committee A. Apologies for the slightly delayed start this evening. My name is Councillor Johnny Crawshaw. I'm the chair of this committee. On my right, I have Gareth Arnold, who is the development manager, and to the right of Gareth is Jonathan Kenyon, who's a senior planning officer. Sorry, I can't see your title there, who's been dealing with the application on today's agenda. To the left of me is Ange Bilby from Democratic Services, and to the left of Ange is Sandra Brannigan, who is the senior lawyer. Down each side of the tables are the members of the Planning Committee. And I would just like to take the opportunity to welcome Councillor Watson to this committee as a new member to this committee in this administration, but not a new member to planning in general terms, I believe. If I can just do a little bit of housekeeping before we get started properly. So we're not expecting the fire alarms to go off. If the alarms do go off, we'll need to leave the building by the nearest exits, and members of the public who are here will escort you out of the building. If I can just make sure that everybody, if you've got mobile phones with you or laptops, if you've got them on silent, please. And if members of the public need to use the toilets during the hearing, through the doors behind my left shoulder, there are toilets there. But members of the committee can't leave the table whilst we're in session. If we do need to take an adjournment, I'll do so at an appropriate point during today's meeting. Can I remind members of the committee and officers in particular, but also members of the public, if you're taking part in public participation, these little boxes in front of us are our microphones. They're not always fantastic at picking up people's voices, and this room is not fantastic for acoustics. So if I can ask anybody who is speaking to make sure they're speaking clearly into the microphone, facing the microphone, that really helps for people's participation in today's meeting. So the way that these meetings run, these are business meetings of the council that are held in public as opposed to being public meetings. And that's to say that we have some very specific places where we do allow public participation, but throughout the rest of the meeting, if I can ask any members of the public present not to seek to draw attention to themselves or to communicate with any members of the committee during the hearing, please. As mentioned, we may need an adjournment during today's meeting, and if we do take an adjournment, again, if I can ask members of the public not to try to speak to any of the members of the committee during that adjournment, please. The only have one application on today's meeting, but I'll just talk you through the way that we handle applications on this committee. So when we come to the application, I'll be asking the officers to talk us through the details of the application, and I'll invite then committee members to ask any sort of questions of clarification on the specifics of the plan. Officers will then provide us with any updates that there have been since the report was made public in advance of the meeting. We'll then move to the public participation section when I'll be inviting the members of the public who've registered to speak on this application to come to the table and to address the committee. When we get to that section, you'll have 3 minutes to address the committee, and then there may be the opportunity for members of the committee to ask questions of those public participants at that point. We'll then move to members being invited to ask questions of officers about anything that's within the report, anything that may have been raised during the public participation. Once we've got all of the information that we need, we'll then move into debate, where members will discuss what they think about the application before we then consider the officer recommendation. We consider the officer recommendation first before thinking about any other options that might have available to us. So as I say, if the officer recommendation is not accepted, only at that point would we then seek to look to do anything else with today's application. So with that all said, I'll move us on to the formal agenda. The first item is apologies for absence. We've received one apology today, which is from Councillor Whitcroft, who is being substituted by Councillor Ben Burton. Agenda item 2 is declarations of interest. So if I can invite any members who have anything they wish to declare in relation to today's agenda, Councillor Watson.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. There's a non-pecuniary interest in as much as I am a trustee of the charity York Archaeology.
Okay, thank you. Not seeing any further hands, so not seeing any further declarations. Agenda item 3 is minutes of previous meetings. We have 2 sets of minutes that need to be approved. The first is page 7 of the report for the minutes for the 7th of November. I think Councillor Culloch, you had something you wanted to just amend.
Thank you, Chair. If I could just mention that at the bottom, the very bottom of page 8, in response to questions, it says Strensall Common was within the zone of influence. It would be more accurate to say the application site was within the zone of influence of Strensall Common. And I appreciate that being corrected.
Yeah, I think I'm seeing nods around the table that we're all happy with that. So unless there's any further amendments for that set of minutes, are we all happy to approve those with that amendment? Yep, thank you. And then the second set of minutes begin on page 19. That's from the 5th of December. Is there anybody with anything that they wish to just amend on that? I've got one thing which I'll mention, but not seeing any other hands. So the one thing that I just wanted to suggest we just amend ever so slightly, at the very bottom of page 22, there's the last paragraph on that page. It reads, following debate, Councillor Eyre proposed the officer to refuse the application, and I think it's proposed the officer recommendation to refuse the application. And similarly, the very last sentence of that paragraph says, following a vote with 6 voting in favour, 2 against and 2 abstentions, it was, full stop. And I think it should say it was resolved that the application be refused. So I've sent those suggested wordings to Ange already, but if everyone's happy with that, Councillor Melly.
Sorry, Chair, I wasn't sure whether to raise it or not because I put something to highlight to go and double check whether it was accurate or not, and then I forget to go back and actually double check whether it was an accurate record. But one of the bullet points on page 21, which was about questions that the committee had asked, says the author of the report was not a qualified safety engineer and was an expert in safety. I think from recollection, he was not a qualified fire safety engineer, but was a qualified safety engineer. I meant to go back and double check to make sure it was accurate, and I didn't. Sorry, I don't know if you want to check it before signing the minutes.
Yeah, I think I'm clear that we asked if they were a fire safety engineer specifically. So with that amendment as well, thanks for picking that up. So is everybody happy with those amendments that we approve those minutes as well? Yep. Okay, thank you. So that means we move to agenda item 4, which is the general remit public participation for this committee. We do have one member of the public registered to speak under this section of public participation. So just to be clear, this is the general remit, which means that we don't have the opportunity to ask questions of the public speaker, but they do have the usual 3 minutes to address the committee. So we have Ms. Flick Williams, who is attending remotely. Ms. Williams, are you able to hear me okay?
Yes, good afternoon.
Hi. Right, so you'll know the score, but you have 3 minutes to address the committee. If you'd like to start in your own time, and if I think you're sounding like you're going to run over, I'll just give you a little heads up that you've reached your 3 minutes, okay?
Artificial intelligence tools have now become widely available to all. So I asked AI, does the public sector equality duty apply to council's regulatory functions such as planning and licensing? Answer: yes, the PSCD applies to council's regulatory functions, including planning and licensing. Under Section 149 of the Equality Act 2010, public authorities are required to have due regard to the need to eliminate discrimination, advance equality of opportunity, and foster good relations across protected characteristics. This duty cannot be delegated and must be considered at the time decisions are made, not just as an afterthought. This interpretation is supported by various legal cases and guidance from the Equalities and Human Rights Commission. Answer ends. So let me give you 2 examples. The first is where planning permission granted for a new residential estate was overturned owing to a council's failure to consider the impact on disabled and older people of the demolition of their existing homes to make way for it. Second is where planning permission was granted for an office building on a car park next to the River Mersey was denied. It was subsequently granted by the planning inspector, but overturned by judicial review at the High Court on the basis that the loss of the car park amenity significantly restricted access to the riverside for disabled people. And the relevance? This committee correctly imposed 3 conditions of access before occupancy to the York Central development. Members may be unaware that on the 23rd of December, by delegated decision, planning officers accepted the application by York Central Partners to allow occupancy of the government hub before these conditions are met. The decision deemed non-material was made before many objections, including that from York Disability Rights Forum, even made it up onto the planning portal. Because let's be very clear, this is a situation of ongoing discrimination. If you require step-free access from the west side of the station to either get to the National Railway Museum or to take a train if you live in Holgate or beyond, you have an additional 500-metre journey through the Marble Arch Tunnel. If you require step-free access from the southwest of the city via Wilton Rise, you have an additional 2-mile road journey. Let me quote from the decision notice. Nobody will be unable to make a journey that they cannot already. I invite you to square that with the PSCD, this administration's 2 core commitments of equalities and sustainability, the transport strategy and the LC whip. What guarantees do we have that this will not now be followed by a succession of applications, all of whom want occupancy before access? Answer, absolutely none. Access delayed is continuing access denied. There must be no more delay. Thank you.
Will be noted, of course, and if you have read from a script and you'd like to send that to me, I'll be very happy to pass it on to the relevant officers for consideration as well. If I can move us on now then to agenda item 5, which is the plans list, and at 5A, I'm just looking for the page number, page 29, we have the application at the Hungate development site, Hungate, York. I will in a moment ask Gareth to talk us through the application. I think it's probably worth just noting a couple of things before we start. The first is that this is a major full application, not a reserved matters application. We might ordinarily expect that where an outline approval has been granted, we'd then have reserved matters coming forward. But the time for reserved matters has expired on this particular site. So it is coming through as a major full application. And I'm sure that officers will be happy to explain any nuance that may mean in terms of the determination on this particular application. I also need to just draw members' attention to page 60 and 61, paragraph 5.52 and 5.53. I'm aware that we've all received a number of emails and correspondence over the past few days, and 5.52, 5.53 just sets out very specifically that the pedestrianisation of Hungate is not something that is within the scope of this application this evening. So again, I'm sure that officers will be able to explain the reasoning for that, but I do need to be clear that that's the case. Unfortunately, sorry, I'm very sorry about that. I'll bring my microphone as close as I can to myself. The acoustics in this room are really terrible, particularly towards the back of the room. What we'll also do, the projector that's on, once we've gone through the plans list, I'll ask that we turn off the projector, and I think that will improve the acoustics quite considerably. But if you can just bear with us whilst we go through the plans, and then we can do from there. So Gareth, if I can invite you to just talk through the plans.
Yes, thank you, Chair. This is a full planning application for the construction of 221 residential apartments with commercial uses and community uses at part of the ground floor. The building height varies between 5 and 7 stories. It's part of the Hungate development site. It's known as Block H. I'll just go through the presentation, if it'll let me. Nope. There we go. So the application site is ringed in red. Members will be aware of development of the wider Hungate site, blocks A, B, and C with the first phase, block E and block F have been built out and completed. There's a multi-storey car park as part of Block F. Hiscox development came forward as a separate development, as did the Moxie Hotel, which is just to the north of Hiscox. Block D, Block H, and Block G are yet to be developed. Block D has a full planning permission, which has a lawful commencement. A lawful commencement has been made. Block G has a lawful commencement, and that was following a reserve matters submission following the outline planning permission. And so this is a build to rent scheme. The site, I've got the bird's eye view taken from Google. The site is central. This is from the south. So its northwestern side is bounded by Stonebow. Then you have Hungate itself, the street of Hungate, and Dundas Street. I'm going to say Dundas Street. Yeah, that's right. Okay, there. From the north, get a better view of the roof of Hiscox development, the Moxie Hotel, the York St John's student accommodation, Block F, Bellaby Court, Block E, Leatham House, area of Block G, area of Block D. Some photographs. So this is along Stonebow, telephone exchange, the student accommodation, and then Hiscox. This is a corner of the Hiscox building, so this is across the site with Block F, Bellaby Court behind the multi-storey car park, just peeking between Block F and the student accommodation. It's Hungate with Block F, student accommodation, Block E. From the opposite direction, so on the Stonebow with the bus stops behind, the lorry is parked on Hungate. A slightly closer shot to the site itself, which is the extent I'm showing with a pointer. And then this is taken from between Bellaby Court and Leatham House. So the site of St John's Square to the front, and then the area of block, the planning application site just beyond that. And that's the line of properties along the Stonebow. This close up of Bellaby House and Bellaby Court and Leatham House. Turning to the development itself. So this is the elevation, the northwest elevation onto Stonebow. As I said previously, it's between, the development is between 5 and 7 stories in height. See along the front, there's areas at ground floor level for commercial and also amenity for the residents of the flats themselves. Dundas Street and elevation facing the Hiscox building. The proposed elevation facing St John's Square, which is 7 stories. And then the proposed elevation facing Hungate and the unbuilt Block G. Turning to floor plans. So this is the ground floor, central courtyard. We've got a plan which shows that in more detail later on. The commercial unit facing the stone bow, amenity areas for the residents here and here. Some flats at ground floor level, but also sort of supporting uses of refuse store, bike storage, and the like. First floor flats, floors 2, 3, and 4. See there 3 lift cores in 3 corners of the building. 5th floor. 6th floor. And then the roof plan showing solar PV on the south facing roof slope. South facing roof, it's not a slope. Landscaping, so this shows within the extent of the application site, shows works to the public highway surrounding the site, and then this central landscaped courtyard with some play equipment and areas for sitting out and general landscaping. And just how it sits in that 2015 outline master plan, with the as then proposed block D and block G. So as I mentioned, this is a build to rent scheme. That's what that means is set out on page 1.3. So build to rent is defined, sorry, paragraph 123, 1.3. Build to rent is defined in the NPPF as purpose-built housing that's typically 100% rented out. Schemes will usually offer longer tenancy agreements of 3 years or more, will be typically professionally managed stock in single ownership and management control. The reason this is a full planning application is the previous outline permissions for this block have been timed out in terms of bringing forward a reserve matter scheme. So any development of this site would now have to follow the grant of full planning permission. Full planning application considered on its own merits. It's a standalone application. The outline is a material consideration, and we've looked at this as part of a wider scheme, and the full planning application sits within the area of the outline but isn't part of it. In the report, the conditions and planning obligations relating to block H that were contained within the outline and that are still considered relevant and reasonable are included in the recommendation as amended. There is an update, printed update in front of members. Jonathan. Okay, sorry, yes.
So if I can just invite, if there's any questions, points of clarification on the plans before we go to the update on the report. Is everybody happy with what they're looking at on the screen? They understand what the application is for? Yep, okay. So update to the report.
Thank you, Chair. So the update has been circulated to members. I'll just summarise the points that we've raised in the update. So firstly, we've got further representations from both the applicants, and we've received correspondence from residents at Hungate. In respect to the applicants, there's an ask there around condition 1, which is the time in which the development is able to commence. They've asked for 5 years. The recommendation to members is for the standard 3 years. We feel that standard 3 years is most appropriate, just to enable members' assessment on that. We've provided you the context from the National Planning Guidance that explains what's appropriate for time limits. From the Hungate residents, the letters we've received this week raise the points around access to Block F car park. So we've set out what the issues they have there and the officer's response. It's also a topic that's contained in the committee report as well already. St John's Square and the delivery of St John's Square is another issue that's been raised, and the delay with that and when residents feel it should be delivered. We've got the officer response there, which explains how we've got delivery at the moment, aligned with the outline application previously, and what members would need to think about if they feel it's necessary to change the officer recommendation in that respect. The final point from the representations is around the building heights. And again, there's an officer response that refers back to the relevant section of the committee report. There's some corrections and clarifications in the report, just around clarification of the number of dwellings and the storey heights and the disabled car parking provision that we've secured by the condition number 35, and the reasoning behind the level of provision that we've secured. There's some amendments to conditions recommended. Firstly, conditions numbers 28 and 30, which relate to the landscaping within the scheme and the public realm, and it's just a minor clarification to specify that they require full completion linked to the first occupation of the site. And there's an additional condition required about cycle parking to require that that's fully provided in accordance with the approved plans prior to first occupation and retained thereafter. The heads of terms for the section 106, there are some amendments there that we've got bullet points to. The first one is about archaeology, and it's moving what was a condition into the 106 purely because that's consistent with the 106 that's currently running for the Hungate site. Traffic regulation order, the site plan's not on there anymore, sorry. There are some works in the highway local to the site as part of the scheme, and a traffic regulation order would be required for those. So we've put that back in. That's consistent with the previous outline also. In terms of off-site sport and active leisure, we'd reported what we were advised the money would be spent on, which related to certain projects and a catchment area. And we've adjusted that recommendation after seeking further advice from the sport and leisure team, so that we'd still have the flexibility to spend the money within the catchment area, but we would be specifically referring to a multi-use games area within the Guildhall ward. The final point to add to the section 106 heads of terms are just some management provisions in respect to the build to rent and how that would function, and they're all aligned with the guidance in national planning guidance, and along the lines that Gareth referred to earlier has been set out in section 1.3 of the report. That's the extent of the update. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much for that. I'll move us now into the public participation section of the meeting. We have 4 people that have registered to speak this evening. The first person is Mr. Mark Russell. So Mr. Russell, if you'd like to come to the table, you will have 3 minutes to address the committee. I'll give you a sort of heads up if I think you're going to run over your 3 minutes. And if you just sit tight when you've finished, there may be members want to ask questions of you, depending on what it is that you have to say. You'll see on the little microphone in front of you that there's a button in the centre which needs to be green. So if you push, it looks a little bit like a Wi-Fi button. If you push that, it should go green. That's your microphone live. So if you'd like to start in your own time.
Okay. Councillors, I live in Bellaby Court and my balcony is less than 20 metres from the new development of Block H. There are 2 aspects of the proposals which are unacceptable. Number 1, access to Bellaby Court multi-storey car park. I do think it's unacceptable to say that the access for existing residents can't be discussed by members at this meeting. There are 101 flats at Bellaby Court, approximately 200 residents, and all the ones to whom I've spoken re this issue are horrified at the prospect of Hungate closing to vehicles accessing Bellaby Court multi-storey car park, MSCP. The proposed access via Garden Place and Carmelite Street will patently not work, and residents will be prevented from accessing their homes by car on busy days, which is absolutely unacceptable. When Hungate was previously closed temporarily, it was a disaster. Your case officer informs me that the new access was approved a while ago and there is no opportunity to challenge that decision. However, there is a mechanism to rectify this palpable error by making access to the car park via Hungate a condition of the Block H consent. Block G is a standalone consent. As shown by the pictures sent by me and other Bellaby Court residents, on many busy shopping days and most Saturdays, cars queue for the car park all the way up Garden Place and even back up along the Stone Bow. As shown by the pictures, this is even the case when there is a car park full sign at the top of Garden Place. No doubt if residents try to drive down the wrong side of Garden Place outside the queuing cars, it will lead to road rage incidents. I'm perplexed how your case officer has recommended approval previously without a solution for this issue, because anybody knowing the use of that road will realise that it's going to prevent access for residents to their homes. There is a simple solution: retain access to the Bellaby Court MSCP via Hungate. Only a single lane access is required because egress can be via Carmelite Street and Garden Place. The second issue is St John's Square, which I believe should be completed, the works as part of Block H. I know that there's an issue about siting of cabins, but it could be at current build pace 18 years before all 3 blocks are completed. And it's unacceptable to be without this important public realm for all that time, even if it means renewing the landscaping, if that area needs to be used for site cabins for the final block. I recommend 3 planning conditions are added. Number 1, a permanent access for Bellaby Court residents is retained via Hungate, access only, 1 lane. This can incorporate, this can be via the shared surface to slow down the traffic, and it can incorporate keypad or zapper activated bollards to prevent general use. Number 2, temporary access to the multi-storey car park via Dundas Street and Palmer Lane during the Block H construction phase. And number 3, St John's Square landscape community area to be completed within 6 months of practical completion of Block H, secured by a bond. If these conditions...
I'm just going to interrupt you just quickly. You've just gone over your 3 minutes. I wanted to let you finish your 3 conditions.
Last
so if you
sentence.
could just wrap up, please. Thank you.
If these 3 conditions are incorporated, I can support the application. Thank you.
Thank you. I shouldn't have interrupted you. Apologies.
It's all right.
So, members, have you got any questions that you wish to put from what you've heard? Not seeing any hands. So thank you for your time. If you'd like to take your seat back in the public gallery.
Okay.
The next person I have registered is Mr. Ian Kingham. And again, if you'd like to come to the table, the microphone looks to still be live. So if you'd just like to start in your own time, and if it looks like you're running over your 3 minutes, I'll just give you a heads up.
I'm a committee member of the Leatham House Community Group, which is a recognised tenants association for Leatham House. But I'd like to make it clear that I'm speaking here in a personal capacity, but I have had a lot of feedback through that process. One of the things that concerns us is the fact that this is entirely a rental block, and we have found with Leatham and with Bellaby that the renters are not really in a position to make a contribution to the community. They're short term; they don't have much say because they're not the leaseholders. When you have a major block like this, I think it's important that there are some consideration as to how these temporary residents have a good say as if they were living there. And I don't know whether that can be done as part of the planning, but I would like to see that. The next point is Dundas Street and Black Horse Lane, which we have in Dundas Street, we have the rental car spot, and we have a large blue badge parking bay, which is frequently used. This means that the Dundas Street often becomes a single lane bi-directional route, and there's a lot of traffic to Hiscox and to Moxie with large lorries delivering food and laundry, etc. There's always lots and lots of delivery vans. I'm not sure that Dundas Street can cope with all the bin storage you want, and the fact that there will be commercial units which are undefined as what they are, unlimited to what they are, so we don't know what kind of deliveries, what kind of traffic they will generate, and Dundas Street is particularly overloaded. There is also, amongst a lot of people, widespread concern about St John's Square, in that it will attract and foster antisocial behaviours in the way that the social benefit may not justify. We continue to have passing vandalistic issues, things get thrown in the river, but traffic bollards are pulled up, etc. And that hasn't been cured. I think the council will probably be well aware of the problems that occurred at the single bench outside the co-op at the top of the Stone Bow. That required virtually a year of the wardens and blue light police responses before they cleared that. With a area that is away from public gaze, that this will attract people who will not necessarily add to our community. And I think there is a prospect of a CCTV camera watching it, but that doesn't really get much ice, because for the vandalism we've had residents videoing very clearly who's involved, and nothing really happens on this. Noise and pollution during building. The council response to my request on that was basically to say they wanted to monitor, they would monitor, but that's, I think, very weak. There should be very clear statements, not just on the hours that they're allowed to work, but on the noise. The previous building, we were perpetually subjected to the beep, beep, beep of reversing lorries and the horrendous noise of cut-in sandstone and the dust from that. I would like to see very precise.
Just gone over your 3 minutes now, so if you can just wrap up, that would be great.
Okay, my last one would be, there was right at the beginning a section 106 payment for a pedestrian crossing across the Stone Bow near the Moxie. That never manifests itself, and now there's a lot more people around and the traffic has gone up. I would like to see that reinstated. Thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you very much. And again, if you just sit tight 1 second, is there any questions from members? No. Okay, thank you very much for your time. And if you take your seat back in the gallery, and the next person I have registered is Councillor Dave Merritt. And, you'll be very aware of the score, so just start in your end.
Right. Thank you, Chair, members. Firstly, can I say it's good to see this application come forward after years of delay and to see the new affordable housing provision in it. However, I've been contacted by a number of residents about concerns linked to the current application. First major concern is the continuing delays with the public realm amenity aspects of the development, given previous phases of it have been occupied for many years now. Residents who contact me asked that the new St John's Square, which will sit between Bellaby House and this new block, should be provided along with it and not delayed to some indefinite point in the future, which could be many further years away. The sites of the 2 remaining blocks to be built are separately accessible, so there's no reason why this square shouldn't be completed now. Second major concern, as you've heard from some of the other speakers, is the access to and from the development's car park under Bellaby House. Currently, it's accessible both from Hungate and Carmelite Street Garden Place, but Hungate is proposed to be pedestrianised. This is a real problem because at busy times, the queue along Garden Place to the multi-storey queue park, which sometimes stretches into Stone Bow, blocks the junction with Carmelite Street and makes access and even egress difficult indeed. The Highways Officer's response to tackling this is not seen as adequate or acceptable, and residents would like to see the Hungate route retained in some form or other. Some individual residents have suggested a controlled entrance or barrier could minimise non-residential intrusion. I'm sure some compromise solution should be possible with a bit of will. Turning to the proposed new section 106, the Hungate area and Guildhall ward as a whole have wholly inadequate sports and amenity space provision and has lost and is continuing to lose some of the few facilities it did once have. So it's wholly wrong that the previous section 106 payments were not used to address this. I hope members will therefore agree the tabled section 106 wording regarding that provision. Additionally, a pedestrian crossing of Stone Bow was previously promised near the new block. In the event, only an uncontrolled crossing was provided outside Hiscox, and it's difficult for elderly and disabled residents and visitors to safely cross, given the volume and sometimes speed of traffic. A properly controlled crossing there linked to this phase of the development is what's really required. Finally, residents say the existing number of EV charging points in the car park is inadequate, and additional provision is required to adequately cater for all the potential new users from this major new block. if that could be conditioned or in the section 106. I hope the committee can seek appropriate amendments to the section 106 to address these issues or to the conditions, and to ask the applicant if they can address the Hungate issue further, or ask officers to take that away and separately address it for the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Again, members, if there's any questions, not seeing any. So thank you for your time, Councillor Merritt. Next, we have Mr. Colin Murphy, who is the applicant in support. Mr. Murphy, if you'd like to come to the table, and I believe you've got Suzanne Yates as agent who's available to answer questions as well. So Mr. Murphy, you have 3 minutes to address the committee. It looks like the microphone's switched off at the moment. Yeah. So as long as you know to switch it on before you start, and then I'll give you a heads up if you look like you're running over your 3 minutes.
All set?
Yep, sounds good.
Don't start yet. All right, good afternoon and thanks for your time allowing me to speak here today. We're pleased to present this application for Block H. It's an important part in the delivery of the Hungate side. Over the last 4 years, we've been working hard to develop proposals that reflect market demand and will help us move closer to completion of this scheme. This application will provide professionally managed rented accommodation, included affordable rented accommodation to deliver new local housing and mixed and diverse communities. We've been working closely with your officers and consultees to ensure we have addressed all their concerns. We've made a number of changes to the design in response to comments and are now in a position where there's no objection to the proposals from your officers, your officers of your council or statutory consultees, and that your planning officers are recommending approval for the scheme. As with all developments, we note there are concerns from local residents. Your officers addressed these comprehensively in the report, but I'd like to further respond to the concerns that have been raised today. St. John's Square, firstly, we're mindful of the significant delay to completion of the site that has arisen, and this has caused the delay to completion of St. John's Square. We remain committed to delivering the high quality public realm as approved under the hybrid permission, and no change to the square is proposed as part of this application. Unfortunately, the constrained nature of the site means that this is required to facilitate construction of the last block, the final block, and is therefore required to be the last element to be delivered. Granting permission today is the best route to completing the site and bringing forward St. John's Square the earliest opportunity. All blocks have been developed with their own public realm and amenity areas, and a significant upfront investment has already been delivered with pedestrian footbridge and King's Pools Nature Reserve. Upfront delivery of St. John's Square would not be reasonable and necessary. It could undermine overall delivery. Parking, we're aware that demand for electrical vehicles, parking spots has also increased significantly within this time, and there are ways that this can be addressed moving forwards. Officers are fully supportive of the approach proposed, and there's a significant contribution proposed to sport and active leisure to improve local facilities and open space. Pedestrianisation of Hungate, we've heard the comments regarding traffic concerns, but this has been subject to robust transport assessment and does not form part of the application before you today. The creation of a high-quality public realm along Hungate, introducing new paving, street planting and seating has always been a key part of the scheme, and the Council's vision of promoting pedestrian priority in this area. And then, in summary, we're pleased to bring the application today. All elements of the scheme have been fully supported by your officers, providing significant public benefits and aligned with the policies of York's local draft plan. The application provides an important step in bringing forward the remainder of the Hungate scheme and delivering much needed market and affordable homes. And I hope you can agree with your officer's recommendation and approve tonight. Thanks very much for your time, and my colleague Suzanne and I will be pleased to answer any questions you may have.
Okay, thank you very much. Members, if there's any questions, Councillor Eyre.
Thank you. I can't find the exact page at the moment, but on the EV charging, there was a suggestion in the report that all the existing EV charging point spaces have already been privately rented, so none would be available for the residents of the new development. Is that correct?
No, that's not correct. So we're providing an additional 2 EV car parking spaces, which is in line with your policy. However, there's also a provision if market demand to increase the number of EV car parking spaces going forward.
Okay. Further questions, Councillor Ben Burton.
Yeah, I had two. The first one was around the affordable housing provision.
Yeah.
It's I just wanted to understand how this is going to work, because obviously they'll have significant service charges on the existing flats, the flats that are built. And you've got affordable rented properties within there. How will you be adding those service charges to the rent, or will it just be something that you'll drop for those properties? How does that fit with those? Because often they're put into separate blocks.
So in terms of the affordable housing, it's actually a discounted rent it is that they achieve. That is an all-in figure and includes service charge.
Right.
So it'll be professionally managed. And then, you know, it all forms part of the equation of the rent and service charge together. So you won't necessarily stand out as being a separate item.
Okay, yeah, thanks. That's the second question.
Yeah.
That's correct. Thanks.
Councillor Melly and then Councillor Stewart.
Thank you, Chair. Highways officers have done an assessment of the level of parking space demand that they think would be created by this development, which they've said is about 70 car parking spaces. I think the proposal is for 48 spaces to be provided in the existing multi-storey car park.
Yeah.
Are you expecting there to be more cars than spaces to park them,
No.
or is your assessment different?
Our experience is that car parking spaces is required less and less going forward. We're having a situation not just in York but across the UK where car parking spaces aren't purchased and they're developed and lying empty. So that's not our expectation.
If you're expecting the level of car ownership to decrease in time, how are you expecting people to travel instead?
Public transport, sustainable public transport.
Yeah. Cycling, more cycling,
we're contributing towards residents purchasing bikes when they move into our scheme. So we're absolutely very much in favour of that. We're providing a cycle space for every apartment within the new scheme as well. So we're promoting cycling as much as is possible.
There's been responses from residents of the existing blocks where there is one cycle parking space per flat, that isn't enough and they don't have spaces to park their cycles.
We have done an analysis of the other three phases, I beg your pardon, and they're not used to capacity. We are providing, as I said, one for every apartment, and it does facilitate larger bikes or likes with carriers or whatever. So it's probably even better what you receive in other developments. It's quality car park cycle spaces.
Okay, Councillor Stewart.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just on the whole sort of rental concept, in the heads of terms on the S106, it talks about homes will remain within the rental sector for 10 years. Is there more than that about how long, you know, things should be in the rental sector, or is there a point at which you can just sell it all off, be that a good thing or a bad thing?
10 years is a fair amount of time. But the intention is this will be a rental product going forward to the future. Not necessarily it's ceasing in 10 years' time.
Okay, Councillor Melly.
Thank you, Chair. I had a question about the new public realm in the kind of in the middle of the block in the courtyard,
Sure.
and how it'll be maintained. I understand from residents that there's been some problems with some of the other existing blocks with the maintenance of those areas. It hasn't been possible to have healthy trees because they haven't been able to get enough light or water, rainwater. It hasn't been possible for there to be grass because there's nowhere. There's maintenance staff, but they have nowhere to keep a lawnmower. And actually it's the residents who have taken on a lot of the gardening work and maintenance work, and they're residents who own their properties. They're maybe more invested, and they end up having their own gardening equipment, keeping it in their flats and maintaining those spaces themselves. How do you envisage that working with
I haven't heard that before. I haven't. So that's the first thing I would say. But in terms of Block H, which is the application in front of us today, there is sufficient sunlight to enable grass to grow and it to be an area that people can enjoy. The build to rent product itself, as I may have alluded at the start, is to be professionally managed. As such, you would expect, and I do expect it'll be managed to the right degree going forward.
And these plans are designed in a way that there is the space and place to store the equipment and for all of that to actually be possible in reality.
Absolutely correct. Absolutely correct, yes.
Councillor Ben Burton.
Yeah, thanks. I don't think it's not a major one, but while we've got you in, it was raised by a resident before. In terms of kind of how, obviously, there's telling owner management groups of the other blocks, but with the tenants, you clearly own other buy-to-let properties. How do you make sure that they do have a voice within the scheme and kind of input into things?
I think I heard that comment. I think it's a really good point, actually. I think we'd have to discuss with the build to rent operator how best to involve the community to make sure it's one knitted community. I think, for example, you've obviously got the community cafe there, which is very successful, and it's a place you can work at as well. So renters often work locally, and with the hybrid scenarios these days, the community cafe is obviously a good place to come and meet. But you're right, there is that's an opportunity for Hungate going forward.
Okay, just a question for Councillor Moroney.
Thank you. Have you got any comments about how easily adaptable these new flats might be for people with disabilities?
So go on.
Yeah, they're all designed to building regulation standards, so they could be adapted, or a proportion of them could be adapted in future if there was demand.
Councillor Melly.
How will deliveries be made to this new block? If people are getting ordering takeaways or ordering things online, where do vans kind of pull in to make those deliveries, or if there's any people working on site?
Well, there's a proposed lay-by on Dundas Street for deliveries and drop-offs.
Does that conflict at all with that being a kind of a cycle route and a pedestrian route?
Well, it's a lay-by, so it's just provision for the cars to pull in while they deliver.
Okay, Councillor Jane Burton.
I don't know if this is appropriate. I'm concerned about the pedestrianisation of the area, which will then make it inaccessible for disabled people perhaps to get to their cars or their parking spaces, and also the accessibility to the car park and the problem with the roads outside Stoneboat where there are problems already. Is that something that I can address to these?
So the advice that we've been given by officers is that the pedestrianisation of Hungate is specifically not within the scope of this application. So I don't want to get into a discussion about the pedestrianisation per se. I think accessibility to the application site is relevant and fair enough to be asking about what the what's proposed in terms of the accessibility of the site itself.
Can you explain why?
Sorry, I'm not going to I won't take questions from the public gallery because we have a very strict way in which we operate as a committee. If members are wishing to have any clarification on to what isn't within the scope of today's application, when we come to members' questions to officers, very happy for members to ask questions of officers to give us the clarification, but it is very clearly set out in our report as to what isn't within the scope of today's application. With that said, I don't know if either of you are able to just speak to the general accessibility of the block and how you envisage, particularly, I guess, blue badge holders being able to access the site both as visitors and as residents.
Yeah, well, the car parking, as you've heard, is not within the block itself. So it's either within the multi-storey car park or as part of the existing parking provision that's already been provided. There is level access to the block, but the parking is not attached to block H specifically.
Mm-hmm. Could I just ask how far away is it then? No.
I don't know exactly how far away it is in meters.
I think we heard it was you said 25.
Just pop your microphone on, please.
25.
Sorry, pop your microphone on.
25 meters, approximately, very approximately.
25 meters, okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Are there further questions from committee? I've got a question that I will ask, but I'm just going to give anybody the opportunity if I think everybody's done. I just wanted to understand the issue around St John's Square and the significant delay to that being delivered. There seems to be a bit of a contradiction between what you yourself have said and what Councillor Merritt and others have said in terms of the accessibility or the need for that site to be available for the development of the remaining blocks. I think Councillor Merritt said in his public participation that the 3 sites left to be developed can all independently be accessed without the need for St John's Square. You seem to suggest opposite, and I would just like to understand from your perspective.
Sure, no, it's a good point. The construction logistics still to be finalised. However, it is important that there is place for the compounds and welfare of the construction workers while the various blocks come up and are built. The site is quite constrained, so certainly you can use another block or plot when another has been built. But you get to the final one. It's when the final one's being constructed, it then becomes, you can see the constraints across the site. And that's when the area that is not going to be a building, in other words, St John's Square, will be required.
Just to add to that, it's quite clear to see on the site plan, if you can get the site plan up, you can sort of see how constrained the site is. And although the sites can be individual accessed, it doesn't leave you any room for all of your equipment and your materials to actually build the final block. So all of that area will be within St John's Square. So we've sort of started at the edges and we'll become more and more constrained until the very last block when there's literally no room left other than probably public highway, which I guess nobody would want us to be closing great swathes of road for months at a time. So that's sort of why that area is needed, and it's sort of the very last piece of the puzzle, unfortunately.
And just for public understanding, rather than it being material to today's application, is your expectation that these 3 remaining blocks will be constructed sequentially, or that they will be brought forward as rapidly as possible, all concurrently? Because there is obviously quite a lot of consternation that this was agreed 15 more years ago.
Absolutely.
And it's been occupied in some cases, I think, for a decade. And this clear, important part of the scheme is not there.
Okay, so in terms of bringing it forward as built to rent, it's just to create diverse type of tenures within the scheme. That helps immediately in terms of the timing of the blocks. It's more likely to be sequentially than concurrently. I think 3 years in terms of delivering the site or starting the site, I think is in the application, and certainly we expect to be within that period of time. If you are successful in terms of planning, there's an element of design you have to go through, and then you start to get the contractor on board. That can take 12 months, so you can see how the time builds out. But it's more likely they will be sequentially rather than concurrently going forward.
So that's helpful clarification. I think where there's some nervousness is that officer update suggests that as applicants you requested 5 years rather than 3 years before starting.
Yeah,
and so if it's 5 years, well, obviously we're not accepting that, but even if it's 3 years before construction begins, it'll take time to deliver. If it's not necessarily the last block, it's getting some reasonable expectation for the residents who are currently existing as to when this important piece of public realm will actually be delivered.
I was just going to say that the reason for the 5 years was again linked to the site constraints. So because it's not possible to deliver all 3 at the same time, they always have to come forward one at a time. That's the reason for the 5 years, to sort of give us some more flexibility, so that if block G comes forward before block H, we're able to deliver block G and then move on to block H. Whereas it might take 18 months, 2 years to develop block G, it erodes the timescale. So that was the reason for the required flexibility. Do you want to comment further on when St John's Square might
yeah, I think if we're looking at block H, so for example, if it is 3 years in terms of site, getting the site forward, you will then be looking at a period of 2 years for the construction period. So that takes you automatically to 5 years, and 6 months after that, or it'll happen during, in fairness, because you unpack the compounds as time goes on. It'll happen during the final parts of delivery of block H. So I think that probably gives you about 5 years time, just over 5 years time before delivery of St John's Square.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Clark.
Thanks, Joe. It was just a bit of supplementary. I got confused by the 3 years and the 5 years then. So you talk about sequentially, so the first block, hopefully H, if we're just going to that, it's going to take 3 years, then we've got another 3 years, and 3 years after that. Is that what you're saying?
Not necessarily. They're different.
Clear on that.
I think it's more likely so if you're going to put a summary together, I think it's more likely that you're going to have the St John's Square delivered after about 5 years, and then within about 6 months after that, because I think H would probably be the last one. You'll have St John's Square delivered.
Thanks for clarification.
Okay. I'm not seeing further indications for questions. So thank you very much for your time this evening. If you'd like to take your seats back in the public gallery. Members, I'm going to suggest that we just take a very short adjournment, a 5-minute adjournment before we move into questions to officers. But can we please make it just a quick one? If we could be back for 20 to 6, please. And if I can just remind members of the public, please don't seek to speak to any members of the committee during this adjournment. Thank you. Right, welcome back to this evening's meeting of Planning Committee A. We are partway through determining the application for the Hungate development site, Block H. We're moving now into members' questions to officers on the report, on the update, and on anything that we've heard in public participation. I'm going to use my privilege as chair to ask the first question, which is, I just would invite Gareth to just explain. I've mentioned already that the pedestrianisation of Hungate is not within the scope of this application, but I think it will be helpful just to explain that in a little bit more detail.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So this scheme, as proposed, doesn't result in the pedestrianisation of Hungate. So any conditions related, it wouldn't be related, wouldn't meet, to my mind, the test of imposing a condition, because they're not necessary to bring the development forward. The access to the multi-storey car park was dealt with as part of the hybrid application back in 2015. That was, which dealt with the building of the multi-storey car park, the building of Block F, and as part of that suite of drawings, that was when it was shown for Hungate to be pedestrianised. So you'd also end up with a situation of at least two planning permissions saying different things for the same piece of land. What I would say is that for the street to be pedestrianised will require a traffic regulation order. The traffic regulation order comes with its own publicity, consultation, and decision session separate from the planning process, which will give local residents, anyone with an interest, the opportunity to make their views known before the decision is made on a piece of highway infrastructure by the highway authority rather than the planning authority.
Okay, thank you. These questions on what you've just heard. I saw Councillor Clark first, and then Councillor Melly.
I'm still trying to understand the access through Hungate and what it will mean when whatever happens with this application, if we do approve it. Can you explain just a little bit more about Hungate and access through Hungate for those residents in Bellaby Court, for example, getting to their car park? I'm not too clear yet on exactly what the process is there, please.
The planning permission envisages and allows for the pedestrianisation. It's not pedestrianisation because it shows it as a pedestrian and cycle route. So the access to the multi-storey car park, as approved, was along Garden Place and then Carmelite Street, and then into the square.
So sorry, just to supplement you, so it's rerouted basically once this application, if it is approved, goes through. It
is rerouted by virtue of a decision that was made 7 years ago by the planning committee. Not the decision of this committee has got nothing to do with the pedestrianisation of Hungate. That has been approved already by the planning committee.
Okay.
At least twice.
Right. Okay. Thanks. I'll leave it there for a minute.
Councillor Melly.
Thank you, Chair. I'm sorry, Gareth, I'm just trying to understand what we can consider and what we can't, because the map that's been provided to us of the application area on page 83 does make it look as if Hungate is in the, in the curtilage in the boundary of this application. So what aspects of that area of land can we consider and what aspects can't we consider, because it's already been covered in a different permission? You said there's a different permission which includes what will be done with this area of land, area of highway.
I think the map on 83 is wrong.
Okay.
Okay.
We'll just bring the projector back up, just so we can be clear so everybody can see. I'm just going to apologise in advance to the members of the public who are here, because I know that listening, hearing is difficult as it is. it will just get a little bit noisier while the projector's on. We'll turn it off again once we
But if-
know that we don't need it anymore.
If you look at page 87, if you look at page 87, the site location plan, that's the ring around block H is the red line plan, as far as I recall. Which is more tightly drawn, is more tightly drawn to the building. Than is shown on page 83.
So it looks like maybe it includes a short strip of maybe the pavement area only of
That's
the
my,
highway, but
that's
not.
my understanding, yeah.
So anything in these plans which are on just the pavement strip along the edge of Hungate, would this supersede the other permissions that you're talking about, which include Hungate? Or
It overlays it. So you might end up with two planning permissions for that strip of footway. But as far as I'm aware, they do the same thing at the moment.
so they match this,
They show a
this application and other
paved-
permissions.
Yeah, they show a paved footway.
So would kind of sign off of conditions of materials and that sort of thing have to be done like under discharge of condition of multiple permissions, or does it mean we can't, on this application we're looking at now, we don't have any say over anything like that, like materials or whatever else might apply to the strip of land because it's already approved in a different permission?
It would. If you're bringing, if there are two separate planning permissions for two separate blocks, and the drawings overlap on the public realm, I would say either or could be implemented. You'd hope they show the same thing, which I believe they do. So it's not really a concern. We have quite detailed landscaping plans, which follow the reasonably high quality paving that's already been done around completed areas, and that's followed through. But the central bit of Hungate, the trees, and then the other side, the pavement that's on the other side of Hungate, that specifically under that outline, and probably the reserve letters as well for the block G. But they can both be implemented.
Thanks. And my final question is just, so Hungate itself and any traffic arrangements and TROs on it, like whether it's pedestrianised or not, aren't in the scope of this application, but access is?
In what sense?
Just that usually access is a planning consideration in full applications or reserved matters applications.
Well, access to the building is shown on. Oh, there you go.
Kind of
Access to the building is shown on that drawing. And that's within the red line, and the pavements and to deliver that access and the links, the cycle links as well. I'm going to guess the direction to go. There we go. Oops. So you can see the red line, which is the red line of the planning application site. And that shows repaving all the way around. And then a paving scheme. And that's of a width, that's about 4.8 meters. So this is, margin less than 2 perhaps. So even if this comes forward before the rest of the scheme, before the block G, you have a width and a fully accessible site. Does it sound right in my view?
Just because, from experience in planning committee, usually we would consider vehicle access to a site and whether it's acceptable, adequate.
We
suitable.
would.
Yeah.
Yes. but this is a site this has been brought forward without its own, without car parking within the site itself. We're not secure, the only car parking we're trying to secure is the 3 disabled persons parking spaces as part of that 43 that's being offered. But because of its location, we don't feel that we need to try and secure parking spaces, general purpose parking spaces as part of the scheme.
Okay. So I'm inviting questions. Councillor Eyre.
Thank you, Chair. Just on page 36 on the affordable units. So it's only 10% of the total is affordable, which seems to be considerably below our policy position. I wasn't sure why that was. And the second half of that is how those rents were calculated. So ordinarily you would look at, I believe, 20% below market rent. This refers to 50% below forecasted rents. Is that achieving the same thing?
The starting point's different because it's a build to rent scheme. So the affordable housing requirements come from the NPPF, which says starting point of 20% affordable at a 20% discount. That in the York context doesn't necessarily bring in affordable housing. So we've taken the 17% that we've achieved on the site overall, and done a calculation of what discount we need to put on the forecasted rents to make it more affordable on a York context, and that's where we've got to. So that delivers that shade less than 10%, I think it is. But at a discount significantly greater than the 20% that what would normally be secured from build to rent through the NPPF.
I put a similar question to the one that you've asked during the chair's briefing, and this is my understanding of the calculation that's been done. And Councillor Fisher, as vice chair, I think you said you'd calculated it and you were happy that this was correct. So in effect, ordinarily we would ask for 20% affordable rent, but because the overall scheme was agreed at outline at 17%, that is what's been applied to this particular application. So we're at 17% of the flats at discounted rent to 20%. The housing team felt that a 20% discount on the likely market rent of these flats would still leave them as being very unaffordable for the city. So a calculation was done to try to bring the overall reduction in rents for the properties that were being made available as affordable into something that was more genuinely affordable. The net, if you think of it as a net cost to the management company in terms of those reduced rents, the reduced rents that bring it down to 41 and 50% reduction on only 10% is an equivalent reduction in their overall rent take as 17% at a 20% discount. So the balance was arrived at that it was better to have a fewer number of flats or apartments at a genuinely more affordable rate within the envelope of what the planning authority could ask the developer or the management company to deliver.
That was a good explanation. I got that perfectly, definitely from what Gareth said. You didn't need that as an explanation. Well done, Gareth. If it's site specific, then is there any knock-on consequences for the blocks that are going to come forward afterwards? Will that create greater complication onto those ones, or will it be more straightforward?
It shouldn't be, unless they're delivered also as build to rent. But it's a calculation specifically related to the particular typology of this application.
Okay, I've got a couple of people wanting to come in on this point. So I saw Councillor Melly first, then Councillor Stewart, and then Councillor Moroney.
I really appreciate that explanation because I hadn't understood this 10%, 17% thing. why was the overall level of affordability pegged to the same as the surrounding development if it's a separate application rather than a kind of new calculation being done?
We've made a judgment, and based on the provision on the previous approvals and the 17% that was secured most recently, based on our knowledge of the history of the site, that's the judgment we came to, that 17% was appropriate in this as a starting point in this particular situation.
So if it had not been built to rent, would it have been 20%? But it's because it's built to rent that it's lower.
I can't answer that. I think we would have taken the same starting point as well.
For comparison, on that point, when we've looked at the other blocks more recently that weren't built to rent, it's been 17%, but it's been in the form of an off-site contribution, so they weren't provided on the sites. That's the difference with securing in this scheme. We're getting affordable units within the scheme itself rather than somewhere else in a different part of the city.
Okay, Councillor Stewart, you also had a question on this topic.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, on the same point, and first what I asked the applicant, and I do think the way these sort of things work out, you know, show the flaws in the affordable housing system, full stop, but that's a different thing. But what period are we setting this for? You know, because obviously we talk about this condition for 10 years. How long is it for? Yeah. Is it 10 years and a day, and then the applicant can just sell them all off on the market at the market rate?
No, the be proviso is written into the 106 that if we did get to a point at some point in future where things got sold off, there's like a clawback within the section 106. So then the money would come back to the council for it to use elsewhere. But yet that is a potential scenario after that sort of 10-year period ends, that the development might change and it might cease to be built to rent. We don't expect it to be, because we presume there's need for built to rent in the city, and we presume it to be. That's why the developer wants to bring it forward that way instead of market housing. But there is a possibility, and the national guidance sort of sets out what you do in this scenario if that transpires in the future.
Okay, so can you give me a lot, quite a bit more detail on that then? What does that look like?
Not a great deal more than I wouldn't be very good at clearly explaining how it works. It's set out in the national planning guidance, but it's a similar way that it's very much the same as how we work out our off-site contributions at the moment, in terms of it's a difference between a non-affordable property and an affordable property. So it really follows the same formula as if we're accepting off-site contributions on any site.
Okay, because I mean, I'm no further on, I'm afraid, of those answers. I mean, from my point of view, if we approve a conventional site that will be sold out, will have an affordable housing proportion, we'll know the basis, it will be done, people will take ownership, some people affordably, and some people, as it were, unaffordably. With this, I don't understand it at all. So if if the developer and applicant rent it out for 10 years, and after 10 years and a day, they decide they want to sell it on, what happens at that point? What does it look like in pounds and pence in terms of the contribution that it will make to affordable housing and everything like that? Is that, what figures is it? What
there's a written into the section 106 agreement, there's a clawback, so that the affordable aspect is paid as a contribution. It's my understanding. We haven't had any build to rent brought forward, and there is a formula set out in the planning practice guidance of how that would be calculated. And then the rest of the scheme is it then just becomes a standard C3. It's still covered by the same planning permission, but the way it's managed is different. It becomes presumably the same as the rest of the Hungate site. if the developer chooses after that 10-year period to go down a different route.
It might just be me, or I mean, I might have
We can't tell you a figure. We don't know that.
£1, 10
No.
million pounds,
We can't.
10%, 30%.
Based on the what happens in 10 years' time. We're looking forward to. So the clawback is based on a formula. But we can't tell you what that would mean in pounds and pence. We don't have an example of that. No, I have no idea.
Presumably.
Somewhere between the two, I'd say. But I don't think that's specifically relevant to the decision members have got to make. Just have to set that this is a type of development. It's quite new to York, but there are schemes in Leeds, there are schemes in Manchester, there are schemes in Nottingham that have been brought forward the same way. And there's a process set out in national guidance, national policy. So what happens if this ceases to be built to rent in terms of the affordability part of it? And we would have to comply with that. We would have written into the agreement that there's a requirement to comply with those national guidance and national policy.
Okay, I've got one or two hands. I'm just going to check. I know Councillor Moroney, yours is on a different topic. Councillor Culwick, is yours on a different topic as well, or on this topic? Okay, and Councillor Fisher, is this also on this topic? In which case, I'll come to Councillor Culwick first and then Councillor Fisher.
Thank you. With reference to national guidelines, do those guidelines include 10 years as a recognised and appropriate period, or is that something that there could be some discussion over within this committee? It seems to me that in the grand scheme of things, 10 years is not an awful long time, and certainly in the grand scheme of the development of this overall site, 10 years isn't not a long period of time. For example, would it be within the scope of our decision this afternoon to extend that?
The planning permission we granted at the gasworks site, which has built to rent, was 10 years. Planning permission we granted on Church House and Oglethorpe, which is a very small scheme, but it's still brought forward as a built to rent scheme, was 10 years. So it would be similar to what we've secured elsewhere in the city. I don't see any necessarily why there'd be any reason on this particular site to deviate from that.
Okay. Councillor Fisher.
More or less covered my question. There have been other built to rent sites in the city, because the one that we approved at Northern House, which has now been binned, that was included a buy to rent element as well. Sorry, a built to rent element at that point. So I think there were some discussions about how that would be managed as well. So I think we have experience of it. So consequently, I'm not particularly concerned about that.
Okay, if we're done on that topic, I will come to Councillor Moroney.
Thank you, Chair. Hopefully two fairly quick ones. Firstly, would the officers like to comment on the lack of contribution to the NHS under Section 106?
I don't press from the NHS for a contribution on this particular application. There's nothing in Section 3 that I'm aware of. So, yeah, there's been no ask put to us.
Is that fixed, or could that be raised as an issue?
It may well have something to do with the fact that we've had the application since 2021, but yeah, we haven't. Normally they come to us as a consultee response and ask for contribution. I don't think we've had any asks for any of the sites across Hungate, and there's nothing in the officer's report.
As far as I recall, there's no whilst we've secured contributions on community uses, there's been no there's been no contribution secured for health provision on Hungate section 106 so far.
Apologies, we're following precedent and that's fixed, yeah.
Well, it's not fixed, but there's been no request. And as there's been no request, it's not been put to the applicant, and the applicant hasn't looked at that in terms of the overall viability of the scheme. So there's no, we haven't discussed it with them because there hasn't been a request for provision.
I appreciate that you might not have the answer to hand on this, but do you know whether there was a request as part of the original outline application? And if there was a contribution as part of the outline application, would that be impacted by this application not being a reserved matter of that application, if you see what I mean? I'm just wondering whether or not, because a consultee may not necessarily recognise this as a standalone application if it's coming forward as part of the scheme. We've obviously, as a committee, had a little bit of a discussion about where it sits in terms of outline versus being a new application.
It's only the 2018 publication draft local plan that introduced the policy that alludes to the fact that we might well need a contribution. So anything before that, it wouldn't have been on anyone's radar.
Okay. I'm not sure that, Councillor Ed, is this on this?
I just think on that point, I don't recall until about 18 months ago, I think Cotmanthorpe was the first time that we'd ever had a request from health for anything in terms of that. So it's been relatively new as they've got more organised through the ICB and everything else that's led them to getting involved. So previously, I think perhaps a learning curve for them as much as us in terms of how we approach health in those situations.
So I think in terms of this application this evening, I'm not sure that we're in a position where we could seek to arbitrarily make a request for a health contribution if one hasn't been requested and it hasn't been addressed through the normal process. I suppose then it comes into being part of our determination as to whether we think that the overall application is acceptable and the 106s are relevant and make the development acceptable. I'm not aware of a mechanism by which we as a committee could say, and we think there should be a contribution on X, Y, or Z. But I think it is possibly something to just take away and think about, making sure that our health providers in the city are making the requests and what we're doing in terms of consulting with health providers to ensure that they're aware that they are able to make requests on these types of applications, which doesn't feel entirely satisfactory, I grant you, but I'm not sure where else we can go with it this evening.
Okay, thank you. Hopefully the second question, if I may, is a quick one. Can you give reassurance about subletting and Airbnbs, please?
Well, I'm not sure it's my role to do that, but the scheme is a build to rent scheme. As the update says, it's managed by a single build to rent landlord. The management and service agreement is required. The homes to remain within the rental sector for an agreed covenant period. Tenancy agreements aligned with national guidance. Includes longer tenancies if tenants desire such, and 1 month options for tenants to terminate the agreements after the first 6 months. And then 1.3, it talks about schemes will usually offer longer tenancy agreements of 3 years or more. So that's what we're granting permission for. If it's overall planning use class is C3. It's because of case law. Holiday letting is a bit of a grey area, but I think it's pretty much safe to say commercial holiday letting is probably a change of use from C3. If someone chooses to rent a property and then sublet it, then I would think that's something for the managing agents of the block. But ultimately, it would also be, if it was expedient to do so, something that was probably a breach of planning control as well. It's quicker than the last one.
Just to box that off completely though, I think we have on occasion inserted a condition around a minimum rental period of say 28 days, for example, which I think would be consistent with the MPPF guidance. Is that something that would be reasonable to do if committee wished to do so? I know that what you've said is contained within the 106 agreement rather than a condition on the application. But I don't know if you have a comment on that.
I think the controls under the Section 106 agreement are sufficient. I think it would be an unnecessary duplication. I think what is secured through the Section 106 is for those longer tenancy agreements for people who want that longer, who want to rent or need to rent, but they can buy into something which isn't a rolling 6-month short-term agreement.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. Is this on this point, Councillor? Yeah. And then Councillor Clark, I will come to you. I'm assuming yours is a separate question.
It was a supplementary, but it got answered. But I've got another question. So
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. Councillor.
It was just on that understanding about the difference between holiday lets and Airbnb. So I would understand under an Airbnb type arrangement, they would be able to do that for up to about 90 days. So pretty much every weekend could be, without having to go back to planning, they could just, for example, somebody who works in the city could rent the property for 3 years, live here Monday to Friday while they work, and then Airbnb it every weekend for the whole year. They would still be able to do that under the current conditions.
I don't agree with the 90 days. The renting a property out for 90 days is a specific thing under the Greater London Act, and it's not relevant to a York scenario. It would still, it'd still be covered by the fact that I think there'd be a tenancy issue, and notwithstanding any planning permission issue. The point about Airbnb, holiday lets, it's all the same thing. It's just the platform to rent it. We would consider it short-term holiday letting or any other form of short-term letting. We don't have a use class for short-term letting at the moment. That might come. There was a consultation done by the previous government. I know the current government are still interested in that. My view would be letting out your own home when you're not there. It's probably boils down to what we consider to be de minimis, 10%, 15%, something like that. So 30, 35 days, 40 days, I would say. I don't see there's no case law or any other form of legislation which makes any other thing, which specifies it outside of London. And the London 90 days seems a bit arbitrary to me.
Councillor Colwick, is this on this topic? Yeah.
So in summary, are you saying that there are no options open to us that would enable us to close off the possibility of holiday rentals? And I'd be interested if we could have just a legal view on that.
Sorry, I'm not the legal view. So I think it goes as far as it can go, because it's a scheme which is promoted for a specific purpose, which is longer term tenancy agreements. It's not a free for all rental. So as far as we can ever go, if somebody wants to sublet and create an Airbnb, that we could never close that off because it would always be unauthorized or out of the scope of the planning permission and therefore subject to planning enforcement if it was expedient. And any number of planning conditions isn't going to change that because people don't always comply with what the planning condition says, and we have to take action or we can take action in such circumstances. But I don't think there's any way. I don't think there's any way of that being a risk, in the same way it's a risk at the moment with the existing block. If people change the use of that without planning permission, then they run the risk of enforcement action.
Okay, did you want to make a comment as well, Sandra?
Well, just Chair, just because Councillor Clerk did ask for a legal view, just based on the advice you've received from your planning officer as to the necessity for such a provision, it seems to me that because it's not necessary, then it would not be legally permissible. Because in order to be a lawful condition, it needs to be considered necessary and reasonable. So I think the advice is that it wouldn't meet the tests.
Okay, thank you for that. I had Councillor Fisher with a comment or a question on this, and then Councillor Watson.
Well, just to say, would it not be for the actual management company to include that condition as a condition of the actual lease, not for this planning committee?
I would imagine it's part of the tenancy agreement because it's designed for longer term occupation by occupiers of the building. I was going to call them owner occupiers, but they're not, more long term renters.
Okay, Councillor Watson.
Thank you. You said a few moments ago you thought the 106 covered the matter. What exactly is the 106 saying on the matter?
In terms of the yeah, so that's the last dash of the last bullet point on the third page of the update talks about the build to rent management provisions to be aligned with the National Planning Practice Guidance advice. And that's about, and the last dash is the tenancy agreements aligned to national guidance. And that talks about, that then goes back to what we've set out in 1.3 of the report. And talks about the longer tenancy agreements of 3 years or more of professionally managed stock in single ownership and management control. So
that will be provided for within the 106.
That's the intention, yes. Yeah.
Okay, well that covers the point.
I think so.
I think it does, yeah. Thanks.
Okay, Councillor Clark.
Thanks, Chair. It's also section 106 related. It was raised earlier, it's just really for comment from the officers, please. It was raised earlier about the pedestrian crossing. And in the report, it does say that many of the journeys are felt that they will be on foot rather than cycling. And maybe one of the reasons why the application in terms of the cycle parking doesn't meet LTN 20. I'm just wondering whether it's possible at this juncture to building something for a pedestrian crossing on Stonebow.
I think it's already, sorry, I need to. It's already in the transport programme and has local, I think it has local transport plan funding.
Okay. So it wouldn't need to be in the S106 then because it's already funded and
yeah.
is due to be.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure what fund, where that comes from, whether it comes from a wider section 106 pot. I know the original section 106 agreement for Hungate, there was about 1.7 million of highways funding. So it may be part of that. But it's according to highways officers, it's already in the pipeline.
Very pleased about that. All right, thank you.
How long the pipeline is, I don't know, but there is, we have the, I said, I don't know how long the pipeline is, but it's in it.
Okay, I've not got further hands on my list, so just wondering if there's any further questions from members, or you're satisfied. I just wanted to ask then, just around condition 30 St John's Square, so it's page 79, and obviously there's been quite a bit of discussion around the delivery of St John's Square and concern about the length of time that it's taking to be delivered. I just wanted to ask officers if they're satisfied that we've made the most robust condition that we can in terms of ensuring that the timely, although admittedly very much not timely, bringing forward of that element of the scheme.
Well, I mean, we've given it quite a great deal of thought, and it remains our recommendation that it's aligned with how we've always looked at the phasing for the scheme, whereas disgruntled as everyone else with how long it's taken for the whole site to come forward. But we feel we need to be consistent in terms of phasing how we've always seen it being realised. So we feel the recommendation remains appropriate.
Thank you. And in terms of, I suppose, the reasonableness, Sandra, I might come to you in terms of just being very clear in this. Is the advice then that it would be unreasonable to link anything beyond this condition here to this specific application? Because I think we're in a slightly funny realm, aren't we, of a standalone application, and knowing that there's this problem with the site, and we as a committee want to be sure that this application is acceptable to us, and are just wanting to test, I suppose, in terms of whether it would be reasonable to link anything more closely to this specific application, the delivery of the St John's Square site.
Well, your planning officers have said that they have approached this. There is the outline consent, and that is a material consideration. It's an important principle, of course, in planning, that there is consistency in decision making. It doesn't mean that there can't be departures, but they have approached the principles that have been set out or established through the outline consent and carried them forward to this, because although this is a standalone, of course, they've taken a holistic approach because it's obviously part of the wider development. Your officer's report has set out the tests for conditions, so that if members did want to attach any conditions to this full permission, it has to meet the tests for conditions that are set out on the second page. All conditions have to meet all of those 6 tests. The necessary, relevant to planning, etc., relevant to the development to be permitted. So that would be a planning judgment for this committee, but you've had your planning officer's advice as to whether they consider that to be a reasonable condition as currently drafted.
Thank you. I think that is clear. Thank you for that. And obviously it will be something for committee to consider. Notwithstanding a condition, I'm just wondering whether or not there would be anything that we could include as an informative, because obviously the applicant has assured the committee that their expectation is that St John's Square will be delivered in 5 years and 6 months' time. And even within that, I think, that's a very long time since this development first began. I'm just wondering if there's any merit to including something that makes clear within our determination the expectation that these things will be coming forward in a timely manner and will be ultimately delivered in a timely way. It feels a little bit weak, if I'm honest, but I'm just trying to think if there's anything that gives us any sort of leverage in terms of trying to see that this quite key part of the scheme is actually delivered.
The informative wouldn't give any leverage. It's it is what it is. It's just it gives informative. It can set out the council's views on certain aspects and draw developers' attention to other legislation. It's what we normally use it for. But it wouldn't help in bringing it forward. It's there's no reason to suggest with the planning conditions that have already on the three surrounding blocks that it won't be delivered, but that's difficulty of identifying when. The members were to put a condition on this development, for example, if they felt it was within other tests, there would still be, that would only ever bite on this planning permission. There are still two other planning permissions which allow it to be delivered following the completion of the last block. So.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. So without any indication from anybody else for any further questions, I will move us into debate. So just invite members to give us thoughts or views on the application, and just remind everybody that I don't need people to repeat the points that have just been made. If you fully agree with them, it's okay to just say I agree or not say anything at all. Councillor Ben Burton.
Yeah, thanks. I probably had about 3 points that I was looking for clarification on when we went through all that. One of them was the crossing point, which has been picked up already and is already in tow. One of them was the access, which is off the table anyway for discussion, so we can't comment on that. In terms of the access to the parking to the back. And the other one was around St John's Square, which for my mind, I think I'm sided with officers in terms of how that works in the it is a confined site, and I don't think it would be reasonable of us to, even though it has taken a long time to develop, we took that risk when we gave the original approval. And without that, I think it is hard to see how you develop a last block without having a set down within the centre of the site, without having to then create a situation where you're bringing in equipment and stuff from off-site, which creates its own hazards for people in the future. So without those, and you're just looking at the application as it stands, I'm kind of happy to support it because it's a good quality development. Build to rent is, well, private rental is pretty limited in the city at the moment, so additional rental property is good. On-site affordable, yeah, happy to support, I think is where I'd sit on it.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Mellier, so you next.
Yeah, I think this public realm St John's Square issue is unfortunate because there isn't enough public realm. The reason why there are Section 106 requirements to provide this area of public realm is because it was necessary to make both this development that we're looking at today and the development that's already had acceptable development. And it, you know, the fact that it might not happen for years, I'm not sure that 3 huge blocks of flats can be built and finished within the space of 5 years. I think it's likely to be much, much longer. If blocks D or G never get built, then there's no way of requiring the St John's Square to be built. And then we've got probably about 1,000 people living in properties which aren't really acceptable development or suitable homes because they haven't got that public realm that was considered in planning terms necessary to make that development acceptable development. It's unfortunate that we can't do anything about that in this application. That's I think a mistake that was made previously. I've just on my phone been looking at the National Planning Policy Framework and its definition of build to rent, and it says that I can find it on my phone that planning authorities, when granting permission for build to rent developments, authorities should set in place a planning condition requiring the scheme operators to offer tenancies of 3 or more years to all tenants in the development. And that should apply to all tenants, whether paying market rent or affordable rent, but there's no obligation for customers to take up that offer of a 3-year tenancy. They can have a much shorter tenancy. There's no minimum length of tenancy. I can't see anything in the NPPF definition of build to rent that says that they have to be assured short hold tenancies. There's nothing to say they can't be holiday let tenancies rather than assured short hold tenancies. So I'm not suitably reassured at the moment that some of these flats wouldn't become holiday lets rather than the homes that we need. So personally, if we're minded to approve it, I would like something strengthening to make sure that it actually is homes that we desperately need rather than holiday lets that we don't really need more of. I'm still a bit confused about why the affordable housing provision is so low, because again, I've been looking at the MPPF and it does say that for private, for build to rent, it's 20% minimum expected of affordable rent. This is 10%, but that 10% being an equivalent of, 17% overall, that's still below 20%. Yeah, I don't completely understand why it's so low. I don't think that's an acceptable provision of affordable housing. And I'm also concerned about parking pressures, because although I would hope that anybody living in such a sustainable location with the best bus links in the whole city and a walkable and cyclable area, our own highways officers have said that their professional opinion is that this development would generate 70 cars and the need for 70 parking spaces, and there aren't anywhere near 70 being provided. And this is in an area where there's already, well, all the surrounding streets are either pedestrianised or access only or double yellows or residents parking. There isn't anywhere at all to park that won't cause obstructions or parking pressures or be unlawful. And I don't see how that's been addressed at all either. I think it should be possible to provide more parking on site. We know that it is possible on this location because the previous application did include parking on the site. And if our officer opinion was that there weren't going to be that many cars because of the sustainable location, I think I'd be okay with it. But I've got this alarm bells going because our own officers, whose professional opinion we rely on, have said that they expect 70 cars to be generated by this development, but the provision isn't there to accommodate them. And we've heard from existing residents of the site that the cycle parking provision isn't enough for people to have that as an option. Instead, there just isn't enough space for them to all be parked. So we can't go into, I'll take the officer advice that we can't go into the issue of vehicle access to the parking for this site, whether it's by Hungate or Garden Street. So, that aside, even without considering that, I have concerns about this application.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Fisher, I saw you next.
Thank you. I agree strongly with those who've expressed reservations about the amount of time this site has come to fruition. I mean, there are people living in the first stages who would presumably have bought their properties expecting that St John's Square would be available within a certain amount of time. It isn't. Unfortunately, I don't think there's much we can do about that, and certainly not within the remit of this application. I would say I strongly support the idea of build to rent. I remember coming to this city 46 years ago as a young teacher and living in something that wasn't quite Monty Python's paper bag in a septic tank, but it wasn't a fat lot better because it was all I could afford and that was all that was available. As anyone will tell you, it's a real problem getting young professionals, particularly nurses, teachers, to come to this city and find somewhere they can afford to rent, and this looks eminently suitable for that. I would have liked the affordable units to be reserved for key workers, but unfortunately we don't have a policy on the council, and that's perhaps something we should look at as to developing a wider policy about who is eligible for the affordable housing in the city centre. On balance, I think I can support this application. I think there are reservations about some aspects of it, but as far as the car parking is concerned, I don't think, looking at the travel plan and the allocation in section 106 for car club membership, if you're living in a sustainable location like this, I don't think you're going to need a permanent car. I think car club membership is a much more viable and economically sensible alternative. I have a fellow ward councillor who doesn't have a car. He uses, when he wants to come out to see me, he gets a car, rents a car. And, that is a good way of doing it. And I suspect a lot of the people here will use that to the full. So on balance, I think that with reservations about the time it's taken, I think I can support this application.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Jane Burton.
I think I'd just like to add to what other people have said. I think it would possible we must learn from this whole development into the future, try and ensure that building is carried out within, if that's possible, within housing regulations. I'm not sure, so that residents are not left in this limbo, which is not at all what we want. I think having affordable housing, rental housing, is something that the city needs. and it will provide that, and the sooner the better. So I have reservations about this, but I'm also clear that we can't do anything about that within our remit today. You know, I am a bit worried about the traffic situation, parking for disabled people in other blocks, for instance. But I do think that the accommodation will provide for people who need to rent, and people do need to rent, and we do need housing. We can't go on ignoring that. So in the overall, in the balance of things, I think I'm for this application with reservations.
Thank you. Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. I think I probably will support the application. I think I probably agree mostly with Councillor Melly, and I'm probably less enthusiastic as some of the previous speakers. Yes, we do need build to rent, but working on those percentage assumptions, the vast majority of these 2-bed flats will be over £1,800 a month. That is a very small cohort of people. That is not single professionals. That is not key workers that are going to be living in these homes. It's 1,100 for the 1-bed, 1,800 for the 2-bed. So on the grand scheme of things, that they're not going to be that affordable. They're not going to provide the sort of housing that we particularly need. Those concerns about short-term holiday lets, the ability to do that, we do know there are a significant number of people who come and work in the city Monday to Friday, and they only want to stay there. So we have got the whole market of the sort of the stay hotels, the apart hotels that people have been living in. There's every opportunity that people will do that. I think if you're flipping those Airbnb at £150, £200 a night, you can probably make back that £1,800 a month that allows you to stay there Monday to Friday. So I do still have concerns about that. And sustainable transport options that are only sustainable as our network is, and a bus stop is absolutely fantastic, and being close to a bus stop is absolutely fantastic as long as there are buses passing that bus stop and those buses go to places that you want to go to. I have a bus stop at the end of my street. If I want to go to Scarborough and Bridlington, it's absolutely fantastic. If I want to go to the supermarket to do some shopping, absolutely useless. So the actual presence of a bus stop in itself isn't. We have to make sure that those networks. Stonebow is probably one of the best, and you probably can get to most places in the city, but that is subject to change. And I think those. I mean, Sainsbury's has now gone up Fossbank, so if these people want to go shopping, I believe we did still hold on to the number 20 that runs very infrequently to Monk's Cross and back around that particular area. But I think there are significant issues with, as Councillor Melly put forward, but nothing really in there enough that we can either fix as a committee or reasons to refuse the application.
Thank you. Not seeing further hands. Councillor Colwick.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not going to repeat what's been said by others, but there's nothing I've heard that I disagree with. What I would just want to put on record, if we haven't already done so sufficiently, is the disappointment that there is no consideration here of funding for NHS services. And I hope that we can take note of that. And whilst there may be nothing we can do about it in considering this particular application, I hope that we don't find ourselves in a similar position in future.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Councillor Colwick, and certainly something that I think we can invite officers to take away and just think about in terms of future applications and how we're consulting on that. I just wanted to actually wind back a stage and just ask a question related to something that Councillor Melly raised around, I think, did you say it was the MPPF or the MPPG, the guidance, that specifically said that it recommended a condition? My reason for asking, whilst you're looking for it, I take on board absolutely the point that Sandra made around not duplicating a condition and a 106 agreement, but I'm just wondering whether, if the MPPF asks for a condition, would it be sensible to remove from the 106 agreement the elements around the build to rent and add a condition which took those principal points, but also included something more specific around a minimum letting period of, say, 28 days, which fits with what the 106 says around a minimum 1 month period for a tenant to give notice. So it wouldn't conflict with that, and that might just align or allay some of the fears of the committee in terms of what the future use of this might be. It's a genuine, I don't know whether it would be a way round, and if the guidance is specifically says a condition rather than the 106 agreement, I don't know whether that would then be reasonable for us to be following.
I think it falls more comfortably within the section 106. And my view was not to split conditions conditions to obligations that related to a specific aspect of the scheme between the two. So if we have a suite of conditions talking about, a suite of planning obligations talking about the length of tenancy agreements, then I say that my view is that sits more comfortably within the section 106. And if members were of the mind that there should be a minimum rental period as well, I'd say I find it highly unlikely that this situation will come to pass. But I think the section 106 agreement is the place to have it.
Chair, yes, I would agree with Gareth. I looked at the guidance as well, Councillor Melly, and it is guidance, and it does say that that I think it's making the point that you need to secure 3 years for a tenancy of 3 years. I don't think it matters whether it's a condition or a planning obligation. I think the point is that it should be secured. And with Church House, I've got the section 106 agreement here for Church House, which secured build to rent, and the section 106 agreement for that does deal with the minimum term of 3 years, and it's set out and provided for and secured in the section 106 agreement.
I'll let you come in 1 second. The query that I would just have as well in relation to this is obviously, as proposed in the 106, it's suggesting homes to remain within the rental sector for an agreed covenant period of 10 years, and noting the points that Councillor Stewart made. Were it to be a condition, that would presumably be in perpetuity, rather than you wouldn't put a condition on an application that would only last for a period of time. And so would that strengthen this coming forward as a rental rather than something that could at some stage in the future revert to private ownership, notwithstanding the clawback that's...
Well, the section 106 agreement for Church House deals with the covenant period of being 10 years as well. So that is secured through the section 106 agreement, which runs with the land. So it remains in perpetuity. There's no difference whether it's a condition or a section 106.
It's a 10-year period, though.
Yeah, yes, that was, as Gareth has said, that's been the practice on previous developments, is to have a covenant period of 10 years.
I'm just wondering whether it gives us more control if it's a condition, because then somebody would have to come back to request it to be removed as a condition to allow the sale of the... I appreciate that the balance then is, would you then not have the clawback that you might agree within a 106 if it did eventually come to market?
Well, these provisions are best dealt with, I think, in the section 106 agreement.
Yep.
Because you can put things in a section 106 agreement that you can't have in a condition. So, for example, if we're looking to secure clawback payments to the council, then that cannot be. It's more difficult to do that through a condition, because there are issues about securing financial contributions through conditions. That needs to be secured through a section 106. So, in my view, it would be better to have all of the management provisions secured in the section 106 agreement.
That's very helpful and very clear advice. Thank you. Councillor Melly, I think you wanted to say, and were you indicating as well, Councillor Stewart, or... Well, indicate again if you want to come in, but I'll bring Councillor Melly.
Yes, it is guidance. It's government guidance. It's guidance on how to implement the National Planning Policy Framework, where it says that that when granting planning permission, there should be a planning condition requiring the scheme operators to offer 3 or more years. But my concern about short-term holiday lets is that although there's a recommendation of condition to offer 3 or more years, there's no obligation if there's somebody who doesn't want a long tenancy for them to have one. and there's no requirement. So there's no requirement for it to be an assured short hold tenant. So with assured short hold tenancies, you have to do checks that people have the right to rent in the UK because it's a home, it's where they're going to live. You take a deposit, all this sort of thing. If there's no requirement for it to be that, if it could just be a 1 week rental, then it can just be a holiday let. And so the question about somebody asked a question about short-term holiday lets and being assured that this would be homes instead of short-term holiday lets. And the answer that was given in assurance was that it's in the section 106 that this would be following the guidance of the build of what, the NPPF guidance of what a build to rent is. The guidance of build to rent, in my view, doesn't have anything to prevent it from being short-term holiday lets. So to me, that isn't assurance.
Can I just come in? Because that's only half of what I said. Because the other half is that it was probably a material change of use which would require planning permission.
Respectfully, we're told that a lot. We, as ward councillors, spend an enormous amount of time reporting short-term holiday lets to planning enforcement, making representations to planning appeals and going on to inspectorate meetings about holiday lets. And I agree that it's a change of use and it's a material change of use and it has an impact on residents. The impact of short-term holiday lets is very different from if that property was used in C3 use class, but unless it's explicit in conditions, from experience, we know over and over and over again, there isn't the weight to enforce that change of use unless there's something, explicitly, unless you can point to exactly what planning control has been breached, it's just not enforceable.
No, I don't agree at all. It's having a planning condition does not stop someone breaching that planning condition.
No, but
it all comes down into sorry, can I finish? It all comes down into enforceability and expediency. And it will always be the case that when the planning enforcement officers are looking at a change of use, which is considered to be a material change of use, they have to identify harm. So there won't always be harm just because someone's changed the use. It might be a very, very low key short-term holiday let. We don't have any policies in the local plan that say no loss of existing housing stock. So every decision we have to make on the basis of expediency is on the basis of harm. And if there isn't any harm, then we can't lawfully take action against such a change of use. And putting a planning condition on doesn't change that.
Okay, I think that's advice. We have to choose. Yeah, that's clear advice. We have to weigh that in the balance. Councillor Stewart.
Yeah, just very quickly. From my point of view, I think it's obviously a shame, but it's no one's fault. Well, I suppose it is CYC several years ago. The decisions that really are affecting people on the square area and everything like that are the things that we can't unfortunately influence tonight. But given that is the case, I don't think there's anything that is significant enough to be able to refuse this application. So I think it is, fine support. So therefore, I think it's all details. My personal view is that we give far too little weight to the whole thing about what happens after 10 years and a day, and we're all extolling the joys of this great gap being filled by the build to rent, which I'm not seeing. I'll be honest, I'm not seeing that great gap being filled, because I think if you look at the rents that are being paid, they are bloody high, and that's the nature of where they're going to be built and everything like that. But they're not cheap. There's not going to be lowly paid nurses who are suddenly able to afford one of these flats. But that is where it is. But on the point about the Airbnb and short termers, I do think we're very much overdoing that. And obviously, in Bellaby Court, they've got various signs up, as people are probably aware, saying, no Airbnbs. If you are in an Airbnb, you are here illegally. And I've been sort of thinking about that for half an hour. And I've been thinking, well, what does that really mean? What does that say in terms of this? Does it mean that people are still sneakily doing it? Does it mean that they have something enforceable? And there's all sorts of ways you can argue as to whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. But I don't personally think that it's going to be a problem in the rented sector to be able to then rent out on Airbnbs. I think Councillor Eyre made the point, obviously, about if you're here for a few days, can you then rent it out for the bit when you're not here? But again, if you can, then you can. If you can't, you can't. I think Gareth sort of said it's that de minimis, you know, principle about can you then limit somebody. So I do think we're worrying rather too much about the prospects. About the threat of Airbnbs and similar short-term tenancies. So where I have vast concerns about how we do S106 at this council and everything like that on the S106 or wherever it fits in, you know, I'm perfectly happy with what the officers are saying on it. I don't think we should go any more than that and make things more onerous when they can't really be justified as being such.
Okay, thank you for those comments. I am just going to ask one very last quick question on this 106. I'm just wondering whether, so in the wording in the update, the last bullet point, the third line down says homes to remain within the rental sector for agreed covenant period. If we were to insert homes to remain within the rental sector as assured tenancies for the agreed covenant period, would that be reasonable, and would that cover enough of what we're seeking to achieve, just to give that little extra bit of strength?
Sorry, within the rental sector for
Assured tenancies. Oh, as assured tenancies. Something that delineates between that notion of it being somebody who's intending to be a permanent resident rather than you know, a short-term tenant. I can see Councillor Culwick and Councillor Watson both wanting to make comments. I'd say while they're thinking about their advice, perhaps I'll take your comments and then they can take it all into account. Councillor Culwick.
That would itself depend on the continued existence of assured short-hold tenancies, which I'm not sure we can take for granted.
Fair point.
Well, Councillor Culloch makes the point precisely. I think we're going to see assured tenancies, assured short-hold tenancies shortly removed and a new structure. So whatever language we use, I don't think we should use assured.
Yeah. They may have answered your given your response for you.
I didn't have an answer, so that's good.
Okay. I feel that in a way we've done this to death, haven't we now? I think we are where we are with this. I think it's very clear that there are concerns, and I think we've had fairly robust advice from officers in terms of what we can and can't do. I don't know that I have any ideas beyond what I'm asked and queried and suggested to try to sort of move it into a place where most of the committee feels that we've at least captured the essence of the concern around that particular issue. Just for what it's worth, I'll just give my comments quickly, and then we'll be looking to get proposals in terms of considering the officer recommendation. I think this has been quite an interesting application in so much as it's standalone and yet completely not standalone as well, and that's quite an unusual set of circumstances. I think I share the concerns around not maximising the amount of affordable, or maybe that's the wrong wording, not delivering as much affordable as we might like to be seeing. But I do actually welcome the flexibility that's been shown around saying we need to make these rents as close to genuinely affordable as we can. And I think that tension is particularly acute in a city like York and in a city centre location like this is. It is a very difficult place to afford to live, and the rental market in particular, I think, has really become incredibly hard. So whilst I share absolutely the views that these aren't necessarily properties that will be easily affordable for you know, a lot of people in the city, you have to hope that at least by virtue of more rental being provided, it has some sort of alleviating effect on the overall city market. But I think we are probably all around the table in agreement that we're quite a long way away from where we'd like to be in terms of the affordability of the city. And, you know, as a city centre councillor, I know it's an acute problem in right, you know, bang in the centre of town. I think the issue around the Hungate pedestrianisation, I can see, is clearly a significant issue for the existing residents of Hungate. I hope that we have been able to make clear where our limitations are as a committee, and I hope that the traffic regulation order process, which we'll have to follow in terms of any closure or redesignation of Hungate itself, will be an opportunity whereby the concerns that have been raised can be addressed. That is the process that would happen anyway, regardless. If you want to change the use of a road, you have to go through a TRO process. So I think from my perspective, that gives that route to be able to address those concerns. I feel more uncomfortable, to be totally frank, about the St John's Square situation. I hear what the applicants have said in terms of the need for the space, but it does become very, very difficult when you're determining applications and having that public open space is part of the planning balance, and then that public open space is not delivered. That's a significant problem. And we've had clear advice that we've been as strong as we can. All I can do is urge the applicants to do everything that they can to bring these last 3 blocks forward as quickly as possible, so that the existing residents are able to enjoy living in the development as they expected it would be when they chose to live there. And you know, it can't be acceptable that some people have lived there for many years in a development that is not as they anticipated or expected it would be. All of that said, and with all of the comments that have been made around the table, I think I'm in agreement with what I think is probably the majority on the committee, of a reluctant acceptance that there is nothing more that we as a committee can do to make this any more acceptable. And on balance, it wouldn't be reasonable for us to refuse the application in its standalone capacity that it is. So that's where I am. But as I say, it is with some quite significant reservation around the wider development, not necessarily this particular block in itself. Councillor, did you want to add something?
Just very, very briefly, in response to what you said, Chair, I think it's something for officers to take away going forward, because this does seem to be this new approach about having the less but more discounted. My concern on the flip side of that is that's putting 200 units into the market at that significantly higher rate, and the consequence of that is what you suggested, that will push the average rent all around the area up, which then means come 12 months' time, it'll have gone from 1,800 to 2,000, and your 20% discount is even more unaffordable. So there is a knock-on effect of allowing that money to go in at such a high level as well. But there's nothing for this one. It's probably for future applications.
Yeah, absolutely noted and agreed. And I think that, you know, ultimately we have to be looking at ways to secure a higher number than 20% affordable. That's the bottom line, I think. Right, I think we've reached the point where I'm going to look for a proposal. Did you want to just add something, Gareth?
Very
yes, of course. Yeah.
On the short-term holiday lets, my advice in terms of conditions is my advice on the basis of how I think that meets with whether it's necessary or reasonable. What members could do is put an informative on that says that our CYC's view is that short-term holiday lets don't sit within, or wouldn't normally sit within the C3 use class, which is what's being granted here. Be a way of addressing it, having something in writing on the decision notice. It's not a condition, but it does quite clearly say what our view of short-term holiday lets and the use class is.
I'm seeing mainly nods around the table and Councillor Stewart's hand go up. So I'm
as a direct question. Direct question to Gareth. Do you think that adds any credible planning value, or do you think that just helps the committee feel the discussion has been justified?
I think it helps in that it's in an official document relating to the housing development in front of members, that it's our view of what the C3 the C3 planning permission allows them to do. So I guess it means that we don't have, I don't know, 221 occupiers coming to us every week saying, can I rent out my house? Can I rent out my flat as Airbnb? So there's some value to it. I would say. Wouldn't I?
I'm looking for proposals then, and I think from where I was sitting, I saw a lot of heads nodding at the suggestion of the informative. So I think if anybody is minded to propose the officer recommendation, it might be to include that as an informative within it. Councillor Stewart, you're happy to propose?
I'll propose that, yeah.
With that informative.
With that informative.
Thank you. Looking for a seconder. Councillor
Seconded,
yeah, seconded. Okay, any further comments or any further discussion, or are we happy to ask Gareth to summarise the position and then move to a vote? I'm not seeing anybody else indicating. So Gareth, we've had a proposal and second. Can you just summarise what we're voting on?
So the recommendation is that delegated authority be given to the head of planning and development services to approve the application subject to the conditions and planning obligations set out on page 67 onwards, as varied by the update and with the addition of the informative covering short-term holiday letting and the C3 use class.
Okay, so if I can see by show of hands, all those in favour of that proposal, if you could show now. And anybody against? And any abstentions? Okay, so that's 10 in favour, 1 abstention, nobody against. So that is therefore approved. Thank you very much all for your time this evening, and that concludes our meeting.